And so we return and begin again. Hi, I'm Bobsy. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, issuesode 10. We are going issue by issue, page by page, theory by theory, rubbish by nonsense through Grant Morrison's Cosmic Conspiracy Classic comic book, The Invisibles, and we're on the 10th one. So we start off straight away with the strength test. It's doing quite well, this issue. It's bored up well over its 24 years or so of existence. This is the cover. It's a brilliant cover. Sean Phillips doing an absolutely cracking job on that. I'm sure you'll agree. What we've got is this very sort of realistic image of a rooster, cockerel, and this quite fab sort of abstract Predator-vision, I think we'd say, view of our Invisible, who we meet in this issue, Jim Crow. He's like, we'll get on to who he is. But yeah, what we've got here, I think we're meant to think Predator 2 here, right? You know, fucking voodoo magic man, which is what we're, sorry for the accent, but that's kind of what we're talking about in this issue. And this quite striking, actually, image of this rooster here. The eye of the rooster is right in the center of the cover. Like, your eye is drawn to its eye quite unequivocally. We're going to go here with Supernova1987A. Owe all of this stuff to the Secret Sun blogspot, run by Chris Knowles, who's a legend. He's written a lot about Grant Morrison's comics in the past and is on a really wild like Cocteau Twins tip at the moment. And he's got a really cool thing about the rooster's eye being a symbol of Supernova 1987A, which means it was the first supernova that we discovered in 1987. If you look it up, it looks a bit like the eye of a rooster or the eye of a bird, insofar as there's a kind of a explosion at the center, and then around it there's this kind of very eerie, quite precise looking from our telescopes, ring of light around it. All sorts of kind of funky stuff, kind of thinking around it. Basically, supernovae, especially big nearby ones like this one, like 1987A, they absolutely saturate our planet with cosmic radiation, frankly, with stuff that turns the Fantastic Four into superheroes. And that triggers changes in human DNA and human consciousness, so the thinking goes. And like, kind of why wouldn't it? That stuff's there, we're here, it hits us. Why would that have zero effect? 1987 is kind of an important year for the stuff that's being dealt with in this issue, insofar as it kind of leads into it's like the kickoff event before the harmonic convergence, which was another big astrological event which happened in 1987, which kind of signaled and triggered the shifting consciousness, which we would come to understand as, first of all, rave culture and the summer of love, and this is the kind of like the narrative that's beginning to take shape as we discuss the Invisibles, isn't it? And then go on from that rave piece into the Silicon Valley Digitech Siberia stripe, which dominates the world that we live in today, right? Which is kind of the link, I think, between the Invisibles and where we are now, which is why it's still an interesting thing to do. But it all gets kicked off in spring 1987, when we discover the rooster's eye, this very big, very nearby, very kind of oddly constituted, let's say, supernova event happening way off, not that far off as these things go, but way off in the galaxy. That ring around the eye of that supernova looks like it could be, it looks like it's so precise, it looks like aliens could have built it, right? If you are like the Kardashev scale of how, and which is something we'll get to in the Invisibles later on. If you're existing on a Kardashev scale 4 civilization, which means you have the energy of a galaxy or universe or something, level 4 is big, right? We're like level 1 planetary level, they're like level 4. If you could sculpt entire universes into tools, then you might be able to do something like create a supernova which would zap a planet with cosmic rays, which would turn on everybody's consciousness, which would have a magical effect, which would do something to those humans there, right? So if you're looking long term and you're thinking, how do I make these humans change their brains? You might be like, well, we can start a supernova 160,000 years ago, which will fire and reach them with all of these funky cosmic jewels, and it'll change the way they think. I know it's a bit far out, but it does have some bearing on some other stuff that we'll talk about in the issue, because this is kind of the first issue of The Invisibles where the Invisibles cosmology, if you like, comes into contact with contact. Yeah, it actually looks quite closely at the possibility of non-human entities, meta-persons, as we might hear them described in the anthropological literature currently, with whom the Invisibles, people in the comics, and by extension us as human beings, interact with, and who might shape the way we think, the way we act, who might shape, human culture, human destiny, who might shape the world we live in. And it's all currently wrapped up in this, awesome, cover, which says a lot about it. So if you're one of the cool things about Predator and Predator 2, when he's hunting, voodoo magicians and gangsters, voodoo gangsters, it says aliens would see us differently. They might not see us for who we are or what we did even, but for the emissions that we produce, right? Which is kind of why Sean Phillips which maybe is one reason why Sean Phillips has gone, is why the Predator looks cool, why we like it so much, but also why that's an important thing about why Predator is such a cool alien, right? And why it's had an effect which at least on the aesthetic level is informing this striking cover. I'm holding it sideways because it just looks a bit better sideways, and it obviously fits the portrait, the landscape orientation of the camera that I've got. So Predator, different modes of vision, meta-persons we're going to go with. I might slip and call them aliens or spirits, but we're going to go with meta-persons and the different type of vision that they have when they see us, where we have time as a factor. So imagine if you're not limited by a human lifespan, you might have a very different perspective on what matters, and certainly kind of in terms of how a human might perceive morality, and the short-term consequences of that, and the long-term consequences of, well, hey man, I'm trying to shape a whole universe here, and these things take time, and I'm outside of time, and it doesn't look like a big deal to me. Sean Phillips on the cover, issue 10. Let's get on with it a bit. Before we jump into the issue, we have to do our inside front cover advert. Oh, did you hear that? There was a little bit of give there in the cover. It's not quite like when I was doing a prior strength test before the one that I just did. There was a bit of a slip. There was a bit of a slip in the spine. So this issue isn't quite as strong as we think. Got an advert for this Vertigo comic, Chiaroscuro: The Private Lives of Leonardo da Vinci. Now, okay, we're going to jump ahead a little bit because when you get to the end of the issue, always we have this little editorial. This one is written by Chaz Truog, who's the artist. So this is a new comic that Vertigo are bringing out this month, Chiaroscuro: The Private Lives of Leonardo da Vinci. And as a little bit of promo bump for that, you've got the artist of that comic, Chaz Truog, writing a bit about it. Now, we haven't really come across Da Vinci in The Invisibles so far, but all of the Rennes Le Chateau stuff, all of the Mystery of Sion stuff that we had, going back to the Arcadia storyline, all of that stuff, which is a big part of that kind of Illuminoid mythology, all of that Johannite heresy stuff that we talked about, the head of John the Baptist, all of that, it kind of relies a bit on people who are way into looking at Da Vinci's works too closely anyway, but when it kind of erupted into mass consciousness a few years after this was published as the Da Vinci Code, it was as the Da Vinci Code, right? All of that prior science stuff doesn't mean anything without the Da Vinci filter. And Chaz Truog, he says here, I haven't read the comic, it sounds quite good to be honest, But he says that around 1490 or so, Leonardo da Vinci took on as an apprentice a street urchin named Salai, who remained with him as a servant most of his life. The story would be told from Salai's viewpoint. How does one of the great minds in history appear to someone who has never gotten beyond his roots, could never tell the difference between right and wrong, and always remained a pickpocket, a thief, and a liar? Okay. So one of the reasons why I think Da Vinci kept Salai, his buddy, on was given quite clearly here. Now, I'm just a straight guy, a boring old, whatever. Don't listen to me, but that is a homoerotic picture. Okay? So what we're going with is Da Vinci and Salai had, a more than platonic relationship. That's what we're going to go with. I'm recording this podcast in August, at the end of August 2019. A bunch has happened in this month, right? So much so that when I was thinking about what am I going to talk about with this podcast, I made a list. It's been the 50th anniversary of Woodstock. It's been the 50th anniversary of the Charles Manson murders. The Epstein thing has happened, and because this is in some regard a conspiracy podcast, I have to make mention of that, and we'll talk about that a while later. It's spider season, so you can't see it, but the Bobsy garden, which is just over there, is chock-a-block with spiders at like this late summer point. And there's the spider or arachnid connection. It's quite important to some of the content of this issue. And Sirius is rising, right? So we're in the middle of the dog days. The dog star Sirius is returning to the night sky. That means a whole hell of a lot for a bunch of like Illuminist Egyptological mytho stuff, right? You know that. And it's also when everyone gets ill, or everyone I know has had minor infections because the kids are off school and they're sharing their bugs around, and it's a nightmare. So everyone's a bit bunged up. Everyone's a bit like, oh, why I've just had these mysterious days off work. But also this month has been, Pride. Pride month is kind of like the last month, but I live in Brighton, and Pride is in August, and it's one of the biggest prides in the UK, probably the biggest one, certainly the most, certainly I would say the one which kind of bleeds over to dominate the entire city, and which is held more than any other in the UK, simply because Brighton's quite small, and it's got a very high gay population. So one thing which was a bit of a theme in Pride in Brighton this year was just because these advances have been made doesn't mean they're forever, and they need to be protected and re-fought, if you like. And there are kind of issues with like an anti-sexually liberal society stuff going on that I'm not very well qualified to talk about, obviously, but this, right? When we don't have permissive societies, I'm going to use the word permissive because it sounds cool and it pisses off like the baddies, right? When you have sexually permissive societies, you remove a bunch of barriers which create demons, aberrancies in human behaviour. I think it's very difficult for us as people or for me, people who've grown up in sexually liberal societies to underestimate the damage that can be done to people when you say your sexuality is verboten, right? The coping mechanism, the trauma that does to somebody, and the coping mechanisms that they come up with to work around the taboo are really weird and potentially very dangerous. At least weird, right? Think of that. And that's going to be kind of relevant to some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about as we go on a bit further. The cover says Season of Ghouls, Grant Morrison and Chris Weston on it. I will talk about Chris Weston in a bit, but Season of Ghouls, all of this stuff. All right, we're going to skip ahead again, actually. Yeah, this is another good way of... Okay, so you know how Morrison had a reading list during the Arcadia stuff saying these are some of the books that we've been reading to kind of cover some of this. He's done another one for this. Divine Horseman by Maya Deren, Voodoo and Hoodoo by Jim Haskins, Mama Lola by Karen McCarthy Brown, and this is the important one, the Voudoun Gnostic Workbook by Michael Bertillot. We've talked about Bertillot and La Couleur Noire, the cult of the Black Serpent, on previous episodes because it was relevant to the frog worshipping stuff, the frog sacrificing stuff that was happening in the Philadelphia church in the last issue, and when they were doing time travel, the Ontic Supersphere. That particular book has been a definite source for a lot of the crazy malarkey that Morrison's been writing about in the previous episodes. And this episode, Season of Ghouls, is basically all that. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the weird little bits and bobs and go, oh, this is a reference to the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook, because basically take it as read that all of the mythology that's informing the stuff that Jim Crow does in this is basically comes from Michel Bertillot and the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook and the work of the cult of the Black Serpent. We're going to talk about that quite a lot, but we're not going to talk about the ins and outs of all of the stuff that Jim Crow's doing. What I would love to do is, and what I'm going to do, in fact, is recommend there's another Invisibles podcast, which you should definitely check out, and it's called The King Mobcast. And when they did this issue, those guys who are, as we would call it, a cracking bunch of lads, they go quite close, kind of reference by reference, and line up a lot of the references from and correspondences from this issue and the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook, the Michel Bertillot text. I'm going to talk, which is where we get the title Season of Ghouls from. Season of Ghouls is zombie making season, okay? And it's kind of more of a point than a point of the year, if you know what I mean, in the way that we would understand a season. We're gonna so any of that, take it as read, but we are going to talk a little bit about where some of the stuff from the Cult of the Black Serpent and Michel Bertillot's interpretation and hybridization of Haitian voodoo with Thelema, which we've talked about in previous episodes. We're going to go into that a little bit more, perhaps, because I think it's kind of unavoidable. It is definitely a big chunk of meaning and a chunk of influence, which from our perspective looks a bit weird and problematic, but I'm going to try and unpick a little bit of what it's about and kind of why it's important. And it does relate to the homoerotic content of Chiaroscuro, Vertigo's comic about Leonardo da Vinci, which I haven't read, but I assume is gonna have a little bit about him and his relationship with this guy Salai, who was his lover. We're gonna go with that. And that like sexual permissive bit, that's gonna be, and I don't mean permissive in the like Republican way of it being like evil. I like that's cool by me. I think that thing that I was talking about how repressing sexuality creates aberrations in culture. We're going to get into that a bit. But let's just get into the issue now, because I've been going for ages already and we haven't even started. We haven't even got to the front page. So, this is the front page, page 1. Crack zombies attacking a woman. It's really scary and horrible. And very exploito. It's like an exploitation cop show. Is the rap for this issue. The rapper, sorry, not with a W, yeah. For this issue. And that's kind of what's going on here. So we're starting off with our initial murder, with the scene of the crime. And we are saying hello to the artist for this issue, who is Chris Weston. Now, I am going to say that the best thing about this issue is Chris Weston's art. It is, in places, it is basically, boom, he's arrived, and he has absolutely, as Simon Cowell would no doubt say, smashed it with this issue. This is kind of like only his second work in American comics. He was familiar to me prior to this issue from his work in 2000 AD. His like probably still his best work in many ways. The work that he did with John Smith in 2000 AD, an Indigo Prime story called Killing Time. It's just one of my favourite comics. It's just one of the most wonderful things ever. The first arc of The Invisibles was drawn by Steve Yowell, who's another 2000 AD alumnus. In the middle, we've had Jill Thompson doing her really definitively brilliant work. And then you get Chris Weston rocking up, and yeah, he smashes it. His art is so distinctive. He's got such a lot of difficult, weird, crazy stuff to draw in this issue, and he just goes, "Yep, I can do that." And he is he's a brilliant artist, and actually, this is one of the best 28, 22, whatever pages of work that he's done. Really, he becomes one of our. He has a big chunk of Invisibles book 2, which we'll get to in about 100 years. We'll be looking at Chris Weston's art a lot eventually, but at the moment it's just this issue, and this issue is a fantastic piece of comic book art. Like I love it. It's great. So idiosyncratic, so ugly in a good way. Like it's Chris Weston is one of those rare artists who really brings out, like, he draws it incredibly, but there's something unappealing about it, and that's really important for like a folk vernacular like comics, yeah, for like low art. He really leans into the low bit of low art for comic books, and it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. I'll show you why in the next page. Okay, we've got to say here, Big Dave there on the back of the guy's jacket. Chris Weston's done a cheeky little picture of Big Dave, who we did mention because Morrison mentioned him in a previous issue, like issue 7, I think 6 or 7, I want to say. It's kind of like this shock jock, very 90s comic that Mark Millar and Grant Morrison wrote together with like Steve Parkhouse, who we'll see in a few issues, in 2000 AD. The long-standing British comic, you know what 2000 AD is. And Chris Weston's giving it a cheeky little nod here. I presume, like, there's no way this was in the script, but Chris Weston wanted to throw it in. Big Dave is what we would call problematic. Anything which takes such big, bold swipes at British tabloid newspapers and the royal family shouldn't be written off entirely. But Big Dave has made it into the Invisibles. And that's kind of... There's an interesting cultural scene there. I don't want to get too sidetracked by that, but it is worth mentioning. It's kind of like, and it's sort of shows how sort of present and aligned with the Morrison project Chris Weston, our current artist, is at the moment. It's like he's on board. He's in the game. He gets it. Scorpion, zombie tongue, creepy, undead crack zombies, frightened woman, horrible scene of the crime. Over the page, and we're right into it. Oh yeah, he does say beetles. We do. You hear so much when you're dead. Beetles ticking in the dirt. Dead beetles. We've got a ref to that. Remember, that was the title of our first issue. This is kind of no, don't go into that. Over onto the next page. And we've got our plot happening. We've got the cops finding the murder. Like, boom, bang, boom, bang, a bang. You're right into it. One of the themes of The Invisibles is boundaries, yeah? Cultural, social, behavioural boundaries between what is good and what is not. What is permissible, what isn't. What should be permissible and shouldn't be. Keep an eye, when you're reading this issue, on... So, like... Within the body of a comic book, boundaries mean panel borders, yeah? The kind of the white lines between the bits that chop up the panels into these discrete segments of not necessarily time, but of like narrative space. Watch what Chris Weston does with panel borders throughout this issue, and it is it's just brilliant. It's like he's somebody who's got such a kind of an innate gift, you'd think, for just how you can use the fabric of a comic book page to tell stories in different ways. So if we go on to page 2 here, look at the first 1, 2, 3, 4 panels, the top half of the page. You'll notice that action within the panels overlaps the panel borders, but the way that it's overlapping is being built up over the course of the page, so that if you like, panel 1 is lowest or kind of at the back, and panel 4 is on top, and they're being layered on top of each other. So this panel overlaps that one overlaps that one, and that one overlaps all of them. It's kind of, it shows you like it shows like playfulness with where we are. It shows a total mastery of like time, of like controlling where the action and timing of the page should happen. It's almost unconscious. It's almost like you wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it, unless you noticed it. And it helps so much with the fluidity of the page, and gives you this kind of increasing larger than life feel as you're reading through the page. It's not too flashy, because like I say, you have to kind of look for it to know that it's there, if you know what I mean. But it's absolutely brilliant comic book art. It's absolutely brilliant storytelling. And look at how many words on this page, or on this, just the first half of the page. There's loads, and by stacking the panels on top of each other in this way, he's managed to make the experience of reading all of these panels good. And the cops are like, they're doing the murder, they're working the murder scene. They've worked out that like one of the killers knew the horribly mutilated corpse of the horribly mutilated now girl, and they were dead when they done it. Okay, and we're off. We're deep into I don't want to say pulp, because to me pulp is about like sort of reactionary social values reasserting themselves, whereas this issue isn't about that. This is a comic with a subversive intent, whereas pulp doesn't have a subversive intent. And but we're in a grim, inexplicable mystery. We've got zombies killing their family, and you get a picture of Big Dave again. So Weston's like sticking with it. The cops are going, man, this case doesn't make sense, and they're smoking hard, and they're doing proper cop talk, and you've got a white cop who's kind of being blasé about it, and you've got a black cop who is, because this is a crime that's been committed and by and on black people, is a bit more worried about it. And you've got this interesting grieving family member in the background who is called La Merci, and who we meet immediately on the next page, page 3. And she is a mambo, a voodoo priestess, and she is using magical trance methods to call on someone to help her out with this crime. She's not having it. All of the stuff, all of like the kind of the ritual chanty stuff, all of the accoutrements, it all comes from the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook, with caveats. It's important to note, and I have definitely said this before, but it's important to note, I've got the rooster again being killed. It's important to note that the voodoo, as it's, or Voudoun, and I'm terrible for pronouncing that, I'm really sorry, it doesn't come off my tongue very well, is not Haitian voodoo, right? That's like a African diaspora religion, which is, like a real thing, and the way that it's being presented here isn't that. It's being passed off as if it is, which I think is problematic, and I don't think Morrison makes a particularly good fist of the way that he doesn't delineate proper voodoo, which is like something that people who want to do it, and that's okay, and Michel Bertillot's syncretic kind of version of voodoo, voodootronics, Voudoun, as he kind of has it, and a lot of people don't like this issue, and a lot of people don't like Michel Bertillot for that, because, and I'm pretty sure I touched on this in a previous issue, but at the time, this was like voodoo's re-entry into the Western magical tradition, and in the way that Western traditions tend to do, it sort of puffed itself up I'm not blaming Bertillot himself for this. I'm blaming the people who read it, really, and people like Morrison who spread the word. They like, yeah, it was just Western appropriation. I can't put it any more clearly than that. But this is like going, hey, actually, this is what voodoo's like now. And there's a load of like real life voodoo practitioners going, sorry, dude, no, it isn't. And it's kind of weird and awful, right? Because there isn't much racist intent here, but it could definitely have a racist outcome, if you know what I mean. It definitely is white people telling black people what their religion is and should be like. And it's tricky. It's important to note that magic and religion are like, the dialectic helps, guys, it does. They're socially constructed and they're spiritually constructed. So what's weird about magic is that you don't just have humans on the end of it. You've got meta persons. Yeah, you've got spirits and gods and stuff as well. And together they create the thing that the religion is. Now, that's not to say that... So basically all we're saying really is that like the Bertillot stream of voodoo and Haitian voodoo are different things, even though they might look like they're the same. And although this issue might try to make it seem like they're the same, they're not, and they shouldn't be. But that doesn't... And obviously one of these things is like an authentic folk practice and religion, and another one is an authentic syncretic Western magical thing, which you know, from a human perspective looks a bit icky, and it does. But the thing that you have to say for Bertillot and for his fellow travellers in the cult of the Black Serpent is that presumably the spirits they're working with don't mind. They're happy to chat to them too. And that doesn't mean to say that it's kind of got the historical depth and social and cultural value that voodoo has, that Haitian voodoo has for its, and there's other types of voodoo beyond the Haitian one, obviously, has for its practitioners and adherents in Haiti and Haitian diaspora cultures all over the world, or in America primarily. But that doesn't even invalidate the stuff that Bertillot and the cult of the Black Serpent do either. They're just different things. And one of them is a big ass religion that lots of people are into, and one is like a kind of a literally like a cult concern. And I think that, God love him, you know, but I think that Morrison does quite a bad job of making that distinction clear here. He makes it look like the only kind of voodoo that there is the Bertillot school, and that's not the case. So La Merci is calling up something to help her solve this zombie killing problem, or this problem. All of the invocations and the chanting that happens, I think I'm right in saying that literally all of it, it's either just sort of Haitian or stroke New Orleans voodoo songs, or it just comes straight out of the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook. Like Morrison gives you a proper list at the end, which I've already read out. You know, so we're not going reference by reference here, because frankly, we'd be here all flipping day. It's another real dense info dumpy issue. So there's not a huge amount that we should like focus on too much, other than to say that that Weston's art is freaking brilliant. Look at the just how lived in that sofa is, and how this this kind of temple, this voodoo temple, is also just a little flat that this woman lives in. Like he catches the weirdness and the mundane together so well. We've got our sacrificial rooster here. Roosters, you know, Supernova1987A energy being released when you sacrifice the chicken, the rooster. Black roosters, traditionally very good kind of sacrificial offerings. The rooster is already associated with suns, and the sun because he crows when at sunrise, right? He wakes everybody up and he struts around, and he does it with all of the chicken chicks, and that makes him like a cool guy, and it makes him a good sacrifice because ultimately he's got loads of appeal for spirits who look at him and go, look at him, he's the biggest chicken, he's way the best one. But his usefulness in human economic terms is limited, right? Because you only need one cockerel. All of the other male chickens, they can't produce eggs, so they're useless. But the spirits don't know that. They just think, they're like, wow, that one's a cool one because he's big and black and he struts around. So that's why one of the reasons why a black rooster is a good sacrifice. It's like it doesn't matter. Don't go into that. In like Homeric times, right? They wouldn't give they sacrifice to the gods all of the guts and the skin and there's long, the Prometheus trick stuff, which explains why that happens. But ultimately, it's you don't give the bit that the humans need to eat to the gods. You keep that for the humans. She's watching Jimi Hendrix on the telly, which I think is it's a bit annoying. This is kind of where the nuance of like pop magic and traditional voodoo kind of gets wobbled a bit. I think literally Jimi Hendrix is there because he did a song called Voodoo Child. I think that's it. Now, Voodoo Child, Hendrix was not a voodoo guy, only except in a very superficial kind of hippie way, much less of a voodoo guy than Bertio is, but Voodoo Child connects him to, okay, so this is why I think Hendrix's presence here is okay, because the lyrics of Voodoo Child, they go straight back to the Robert Johnson Devil at the Crossroads blues myth, but kind of more importantly than that, the lyrics of Voodoo Child, all the stuff about chopping down a mountain with the edge of his hand, connects Hendrix's musical style, lyrical style, to something even earlier than Robert Johnson in the blues in the 20s. It takes it back into the 19th century. All of that kind of that braggadocio, that kind of hyper exaggeration, that giganticism of poetic effect and poetic aesthetics. So that's why he's here, and he did a cool song called Voodoo Child. Down, down, down. Watch how the smoke wraps itself around La Mercy's neck and turns into a snake, and just how squirmily and brilliantly Western draws that. It's really fab. And Batal. Over the page onto page 4, we've got our splash page, and we meet this guy, who is, for all his problems, a very likeable character. This is Jim Crow, who's an invisible. Right. But he's also Papa Gede, who is a unga, or a loa, a loa from traditional voodoo, and is a figure, like a spirit, a god of significance, great significance, within Bertio's syncretic, thelemic, Typhonian, thing. The Bertio thing, and I'm not doing this terribly well, because there's a lot going on here. There, I've said it. There's a lot going on here. Season of Ghouls. Let's do the credits. Grant Morrison, writer. Chris Weston, artist. Daniel Vozzo, colorist. Clem Robbins, letterer. Julie Rottenberg, associate editor. Stuart Moore, editor. The Invisibles, created by Grant Morrison. I love the cheeky way that Chris Weston has signed his name on the writing of the gravestone here. Jim Crow is interesting. So Jim Crow is like a character from an old minstrel song. We'll talk about minstrels later. The song of Jim Crow, like Jumpin' Jim Crow or Jump Jim Crow, has lots of there's interesting kind of things about Jim Crow in the way that being ridden by spirits morphs his body and kind of makes him makes his joints and bones stick out at funny angles, which is kind of something that those contortions do happen in spirit possession moments. Yeah, if you're kind of deep into a trance, your body might suddenly, as when serotonin surges happen, your muscles tense up and stuff. So possession or being ridden creates these strange contortions of the body, which is in Jim Crow. Jim Crow was based on like a kind of a possibly apocryphal black slave who, yeah, like I say, he's apocryphal, but maybe he came from Pennsylvania, maybe from Cincinnati, maybe St. Louis. This minstrel singer called Foster, I think, saw this black slave guy, bless him, working in working in like a stable or something, and he would sing this song and kind of do a little jump as he did it. It was called Jim, and this guy was called Jim Crow. Probably wasn't, but it was probably called Jim Cuff. And Foster saw him and thought, oh, that's quite good, and kind of nicked the character, wrote a song, and incorporated it all up into his minstrel routine. He was Jim Crow was a very popular minstrel song. Foster was one of the superstars of the minstrel scene in the sort of the heyday of minstrelsy. Was like 1830s to 1860s, I want to say 1870s maybe. Interestingly, Foster performed the Jim Crow song in Liverpool, which is one of our Invisibles hotspots. Oh yeah. So like so the families of spirits, the lower, are often called les invisibles, the invisibles in Haitian voodoo. Because they're invisible, right? But they're there, and so this is why our comic called The Invisibles goes into Haitian voodoo. Like one of the reasons, other than Morrison's personal ones, there are, it connects. It makes sense. It's okay. Where was I? There's a lot going on here, guys. So the name Jim Crow means crow. So crow as in crowbar, like a jimmy, like a jemmy, and crow as in crow. Crows dig. Crows are if you've ever seen a crow try and get into anything, it will get in. They're great at opening things. They're great at removing boundaries, opening boundaries, whether that boundary is a doorway or the boundary between above the earth and under the earth. Yeah, so they're very good totems for underworldy kind of things, as we will see. Interesting to spot. I mean, there's loads of just great details in this splash page. It's really powerful. He's obviously at the crossroads. He's in a graveyard. He's got a skull on his crotch with the vive or veve of Papagede there. Oh no, or is that a sigil of a Nomo from from Atlantis? The Atlantean origins of Haiti, as Bertillot gives them, are exactly the same as like theosophical, illuminoid, Masonic, we come from Atlantis lore, basically, with a African diaspora twist. The cockerel, which is dead in the real world, is alive in the underworld. It's been able to pass through. Jim Crow, Papagede, guardian of the crossroads, guardian of dead spirits, happy, approachable, bawdy, decent guy. He only takes you when it's your time. What else is he doing? He's got a feather in his cap. He's got a clock on his helmet because he only takes you when it's time. He's got an adamant stripe across his nose. He's got an ace of spades card. Ace of spades, yeah, like digging spades. What else should we say about this? I mean, we're still in France. You know how I'm obsessed with this weird strain of just like French historic stuff in the Invisibles. We're still, we've literally had loads of panels of La Merci who's got speaking in French, right? So we're still in France. There's still a big French vibe to the Invisibles, which is odd, and I hadn't noticed before now. The crossroads here is one of them is pointed towards Saint Michel. Obviously, there's lots of towns called Saint Michel, but I think we're talking about Saint Michael here, as in Michael Bertillot, who is, reasonably enough, the saint of this particular interpretation of voodoo that we're dealing with. I'm not going to say again that he's smoking a big bifter. I'm not going to say again that he's holding a stang, that it's not the right one, but it isn't. But that's cool. We're here dealing with this version and not the real one, okay? And he's there and he says, "Hey, I can help you. I'm here, little sister. I'm always here. You've come a long way to see me. What's up?" And she breaks it down for him. She's got a real snake around her neck by now. This is, it's not a black snake, it's not a mamba or whatever, but she is a mambo. Someone's laid a bad conjure on the neighbourhood. Find the boys. I want it stopped. I want vengeance. Find the boy's soul. Basically, she understands that somebody is creating zombies to kill the neighbourhood kids who were related to her, the guys at the start. There's a spider web gets in my way and I can't get no further. As I say, the garden's chock-a-block with spider webs at the moment. It feels very right to be dealing with this issue right now, as if we are deep within the season of ghouls. I don't know. There was another thing about the Ace of Spades that I wanted to say. What was it? Oh yeah. You know, so the digging thing is funny. That's cool. But the Ace of Spades, you know that like the Ace of Spades is the only one in a normal deck which has got like a funky design on it, right? That's because this is really interesting. That's because of stamp duties, because of taxes. When you were issuing packs of cards, there was a duty on the printing and on the paper, and that had to be stamped. So and the law was you had to stamp it on the Ace of Spades, and eventually they incorporated that fanciness, the kind of the stamp design, into the design of the ace itself. Obviously, for tax purposes, not just for tax purposes, but because in a deck of playing cards, when you're gambling, all of the players and the house need to be able to prove that there's a trust issue involved. Yeah, a stamp is required, not just for the tax, but to prove that this pack of cards is legit and that you don't have to worry about them being tampered with, so that somebody can cheat you out of playing the game, because there's money at stake. So the reason that Ace of Spades are all funky is because the stamp was put on the Ace of Spades. That stamp duty is one of the kickers for the American Revolution, right? So you know how we've been talking in the previous episode about how the French Revolution is bleeding into the American Revolution? With this prominence that we've got of the Ace of Spades, we're back there again. The stamp duty generally, but which is best expressed through the Ace of Spades, symbolised by it, is one of the things which made the American colonies so pissed off that they revolted, like the tea tax or whatever, yeah? It was one of those trigger events that led to the formation of the American state. He says, "No worries, I'm going to check out what's going on here." His crow says spider and scorpion, but it spells out the words. I'm not sure what the significance of that is, except that it's like an oracular thing to do. You would get a letter at a time if you were doing this through a Ouija board. Oh, that's right, and it's called a Ouija bird. Oh yeah, that's why. Because it's like an oracular bird that digs it and spells out the answers that you're looking for. And he says, "Oh, if it's the insect lower, you don't want to go messing with it. La merci. Let me see what I can do, and in return, you can cook up a big feast for me." She says, "I will. Thank you, Bessie. Thank you." And then she's back in the room, literally. The way that Chris Weston draws this, the kind of the gnarly detail on everything, the expressiveness of the faces, the kind of the exaggerated, like the people's bodies are exaggerated, but they're real exaggerateds. Like his face and stuff, he looks so cool, and she's got such like her body just looks like an older man's body. It's just great. Yeah. And okay, so that's the mission. We're off. We've got the cops dealing with the zombie killing, and now we've got our invisible buddy here, Jim Crow, sorting it out. He introduces himself. Oh no, he doesn't. That's not for a couple of pages. We're back with the cops. They're investigating the thing. They basically got a phone call from La Merci, who said these guys are up to it, and she has led them to Unitol. Unitol is like an evil company, evil corporation. We find out also that we are in Chicago here, which is where Michel Bertillot is from, which is where the cult with the Black Serpent is based. He was a social worker. I think I mentioned this in the last issuesode. He was a social worker working with the Haitian community for a long time. So kind of accusations of him being not a legit guy, I don't think are fair, because he, for a French guy who is probably seeking to, you know, in a kind of a ancestral root worky kind of fashion, seeking to. He's a guy from French heritage. He's probably looking to do some healing between the French and Haitian communities because there's a big historical problem there, right? And I'm not saying that his method of doing so is without its problems, but I suspect his intentions were worthy and legitimate and authentic, and he knows a shitload more about people from the Haitian community, certainly in Chicago, than I do. So I'm definitely not going to say that he was racist in doing this. I think that's absurd. I don't think this comic necessarily gets that across. I think you have to dig into it a bit. Happy to help. Unitol, in real life, is a French, it's a French steel company. And it's a steel company which makes precision-engineered components for, well, I don't know, I didn't really look into it that far, but like, if you're creating precision steel parts, you're doing two things. You're creating factories, and you're creating weapons. That means you're basically a state entity. So Unitol is, although we're giving it here as like a kind of just like a pharmaceutical stroke tech company, like an evil kind of RoboCop corp, in reality, it's an arm of the French state. So there you go. Unitol Pharmaceuticals, yeah, the pharmaceuticals is important. Hey, you didn't do this because of the crazy voodoo woman, and we meet our main baddie, who's this guy, Mr. Dollymore. Dolly, I think, is where we're going with the name Dollymore. I think because of puppets and dolls. He has got a brilliantly evil face. He's got such a slimy, crooked leer. The cops are like, "Hey man, we want to talk to you," and he's like, can we have a minute? A minute? Well, that'll cost you at least $1,000. He's just an asshole. Morrison's great at writing baddies who you hate, and Weston is even better at drawing them. I mean, what a piece of shit. What a slime ball. You know? So that's Mr. Dollymore. The cops are onto him because he got a tip-off from the voodoo woman, La Merci. The next page is our Musicland Sam Goody advert. The two records this week are The Roots, Do You Want More? And Nile by KMFDM. We'll talk about The Roots in a minute because I like to talk about the music adverts in the comics because it's fun to do so, and it lets me talk about comics rather than music rather than comics for a minute. And sometimes the content of the adverts throws a lot of light onto the comic, which is the real reason that we're here to have a podcast, right? A videocast thing, whatever it is, I don't know. And this is one of those with The Roots, anyway, certainly. I listened to KMFDM Nihil. I didn't like it. I'm sorry, I didn't like it. It sounds to me, it's like kind of industrial, it's like industrial cheese pop music, sort of, you know? It's like it takes industrial music and sort of strips any of the actual alienating effect from it and turns it into like a beat that you can sort of nod your head to without noticing. Industrial music started as like a kind of a very aggressively transgressive and rebellious, if you like, form of like avant-garde rock and roll-y sort of stuff. And by the time it goes to KMFDM Nihil, it's interesting how much the cyborgized industrial subject has become recouped already. The music of KMFDM prepares cyborgization for the platforms that it would be distributed through. The industrial, basically they make music which you can play shit computer games to, and then you put down the controller and you start writing code. So whether you're a producer or a consumer, the beat of this kind of like watered down industrial music does that. I did not like it, guys. Sorry. I noticed that this it's got a cool cover though. And I noticed as I was doing my research here that the artist of this cover, whose name escapes me, I'm terribly sorry. I should have made more of a note and remembered it. But she died a couple of weeks ago. That's another one of the things that happened August 2019, was that the woman who drew that picture, bless her, she died of lymphoma, which is just like a couple of weeks ago. It's really sad. And she was the wife of the drummer or something. And I'm sorry about that, but I did not like Nihil by KMFDM. I feel like it's interesting though that the production of the cyborg subject and the production of the was happening kind of before the production of the platforms, or at least in parallel with the platforms through which the cyborg subject would express itself, create itself. Culturally, it was already having its music given to it, because it's just shit music for cheap video games. Sorry, KMFDM fans. Okay, now over the page, and we get an actual bit of intro into who Jim Crow is. Oh dear, I'm going to read it because it's... Oof. So this is Jim Crow saying this, our buddy, he's an invisible. All we're saying is, how come when so many brothers want to get radical, they inevitably turn Muslim? I don't want to diss Brother Malcolm or nobody here, but that monotheistic bullshit's the tool of the oppressor. You know what I'm saying? You can't win with that shit. We go way back for our shit, man. We go right back to the original African religion, back to the place of real black power. And they're all dressed up like... sort of like a slightly... They look a bit like X-Clan, or like one of those, like... like one of the, frankly, Muslim-derived... Afrocentric hip-hop groups from the early 90s, and also a bit like Grandmaster Flash the Furious 5 from like the 80s. This is cringe. It's really cringy the way that Morrison has gone. I know, I've just thought of a brilliant hip-hop band, and they're into voodoo. They're not Muslims. I think this is so... Yeah, it's really cringy, and kind of wrong in a way which is a bit arrogant in like a Tarantino-y sort of way. There's a lot of use of the N-word and stuff in this issue. We'll get to that later. They're called the Root Doctors. Root Doctors are the first voodoo rap act, and we're saying to all the brothers and sisters, get yourself connected to the source. The source is like kind of the unfolding white light in voodoo, and also in Jack Kirby comics, like significantly. The Root Doctors. So on this page 7, we are told that there's a hip-hop act called the Root Doctors, and on the previous page we have an advert by a hip-hop act called the Roots. So that's what the Root Doctors are like, right? I mean, go with me here, that when two things happen, the Root Doctors, it's practically the same name. When two things happen in close proximity, we have to pay extra attention. Now, Morrison's on the record as saying that, like, he didn't really know what the Root Doctors sounded like until a couple of years after this, a year or two after this, I guess, when Dr. Octagon, Cool Keith from the Ultramagnetic MC's record, Octogynecologist, came out, produced by Dan the Automator. He said that's what the Root Doctors sound like. I haven't listened to that record in a long time. I remember liking it a lot, but we were very young, weren't we? So we'll have to see. I definitely remember it being a hip-hop record that white people were really excited about, and didn't hear the actual hip-hop community talk about it all that much. I don't know, I just think this is really pig-headed in all sorts of reasons. So one thing that voodoo obviously is, it's not the original African religion, because it's literally being dragged through French Catholicism in order to form its current form. Now, I'm not saying that for the people of Haiti that's not a real thing. I'm saying that calling it to, and obviously it connects to, animistic, like, African traditions, but to say that voodoo is the original African religion is pretty offensive, I think, and just dumb. Is monotheism? I'm not too. I kind of agree that monotheistic bullshit is the tool of the oppressor. I'm quite happy with that. But monotheism comes from Africa too, right? It comes from Egypt, like Akhenaten. You know, he was the first one to say, "Hey, there's only one God, and it's me." Um, so monotheism is African. This is the problem when you and also like Islam is African as hell. You know, and this is like the real problem that you get when white people say stuff like African rather than being a bit more specific. So like, even though it's been filtered through, even without being filtered through French Catholicism, the kind of like Yoruban roots of voodoo are very different to the sort of, that's West African basically, very different to the North African strip of Islam, but they're both African. And I know that Islam started in the Middle East, but that's like saying that like European Catholicism is Middle Eastern. Ultimately, it's like it kind of isn't, is it? Or at least it's just as much European as it is Middle Eastern. In the same way, Islam is just as much North African as it is Middle Eastern too, right? It's like, I don't know. I think this whole bit is really clunky and dumb, and I think that the root doctors look like an act that you wouldn't listen to. I think they look rubbish. Frankly, they look a bit like X-Clan and a bit like Grandmaster Fast and the Furious 5 or Africa Bambaataa and the Mighty Zulu Nation, who maybe we'll talk a bit about later. Actually, maybe that's not irrelevant to this thing we're talking about. And you know, and given the evidence that we have here, because like the roots and the root doctors, we have to say that the despite Morrison's intentions, or kind of like the music in his head, the root doctors don't sound like Dr. Octagon. They sound like the roots, because the proof is literally in my hands. And I do not like the roots. I'm really sorry, but I think that they're for me. Everybody's got their own opinion, man. Don't worry about it. It's just mine. If you like the roots, go for it. It's fine. What I like about hip hop is that it's synthetic and syncretic, and it's two turntables and a microphone and a production desk, and you pull in samples and you create sounds out of patchworks. The Roots have got a different attitude to hip hop, and they create it using live instruments. And I mean, or at least they do on this album. On this album here, Do You Want More, which is the album that was contemporary with the Root Doctors, with a Z. I really hate that record. I think it's so leaden and dull, and it's really interested in kind of trying to create like an authentic jazz strip of kind of heritage, which kind of like, it's like the futurism of hip hop for me is all about. No, that's not important. It's about you create textures and musical subjectivities anew, using the wreckage of the past and the living moment as expressed by the lyrics. And the lyrics in Roots records are fine, you know, organic jazz, hip hop, or whatever it is. Yeah, organic. I'm not interested in organic hip hop. I want it to be synthetic. You could tell that, like the drummer Questlove, who I talked about on another podcast on Episode Party, which was released this month as well, this August. So go and you'll find that on episode.party. I'm on that with my boy Adam from Diane, and Jack and Freddie from Episode Party. We reviewed a podcast that Questlove hosts, or is a guest on, not that he hosts. And he's a really interesting guy, but that form of hip hop, because it's really keen to connect itself to its jazz heritage, and because like white rock but just copied the rhetoric of jazz and blues to make itself seem authentic and real, it's much more easily assimilable by white culture, and the Roots are like the acceptable face of hip hop, if you like. They're respectable because they, in my view, because they adopt a similar rhetoric of authenticity and realness that white rock fans like. So therefore, their So the Roots are like the house band of, NBC's Tonight Show, right? They're super duper mainstream. They're all of the confrontational edges of hip hop have been stripped off in the Roots' music. In my opinion, I'm not a fan. And too much drumming. You can the drums are all the fucking same all the way through, because one of the main guys in the band is the drummer, and he's a good drummer, but he's too high in the mix. And really, this band, the Root Doctors, they look a bit cringe. Like they just, yeah. And if you think, kind of at the time, prominent bands working with this kind of syncretic sort of self-mythology thing, you've probably got to think of the Wu-Tang. Obviously, that relates to their don't want to diss Brother Malcolm thing a bit, insofar as they're 5% are influenced, kind of I'm surprised actually that it isn't felt that the Wu-Tang thing doesn't fit better with an Invisibles frame, because it's Gnostic, it's somewhat initiatory, and has the benefit in terms of going back to black power, real black power. It does literally say, if you're a black man, you're God. So you can kind of see how that would have some appeal. But interestingly, those kind of militant, emancipatory American forms of Islam were kind of made impossible after 9/11 and the War on Terror, which I'm sure is just a coincidence. I'm sure that wasn't the point at all. So is that all to say about? Is that all my boring hip hop opinions? Oh, worth noting that the Roots come from Philadelphia, and as we know, there is a chapter of magicians practicing something somewhat akin to the cult of the Black Serpent in the church in Philadelphia last issue, right? So the case for the Roots being the real life Root Doctors, especially with their easily slippable into the New World Order President Obama bullshit, actually makes them a pretty good candidate, I think, regardless of what their sound is like. And also the point that it is a shame that, although you can see why it's very obvious from the outfits, why this form of voodoo hip hop didn't kind of take off, beyond it just being a kind of a silly throwaway idea, which shouldn't be taken that seriously and shouldn't be getting as much time in a podcast as I'm giving it. I'm going to say, unfortunately, the kind of the overwhelming hip hop ideology quickly became, not too long after this, radical materialism, get rich or die trying, if you like. A materialism which says that the only material reality is the only reality, and furthermore, the only capital cash is the only possible register for how that materialism can be accounted for and expressed and exercised. And that's horrible. That was a bad phase, wasn't it? Pink hair, synthetic opiates, SoundCloud rap, all of those hip hop things which I'm too old to talk about. There's a lot of astrology. There's a lot of irrationalism. There's a lot of witchy shit in SoundCloud rap, and maybe that's what the back door of the Root Doctors voodoo rap ended up sounding like 15, 20 years later. Yeah? Pink hair. This page is good because I like the blue light of the telly. I don't think I'm making it up that Jim is based in. I don't think I'm making it up that plasma screens, no one says plasma screens anymore, do they? But digital screens don't give off quite the same spooky blue light that old school tellies did, do they? The thing I was saying about the layering up of the panels and the way that Chris Weston builds the page upon itself like that. It's interesting that both of the TV panels here are on the top, and all of the other panels are underneath them. So these TV panels have the most prominence within the page because they operate on a slightly different plane of reality, or indeed reflect a transition between planes of reality. Jim is meditating on the screen. It's spider season, and he's kind of using that as like a kind of as a kind of a enchanted circle, if you like a safe space where a representation of him is that can be kept while he calls the spirit of Papagede into him and goes on a little jaunt around the spirit world. Now, this is cool because much like with the time travel thing, we're learning that invisibles aren't just club kids. They're not just hipsters who have got some guns and some dynamite. They they could time travel, and they've got other cool magic powers like being able to become pretty easily one with genuine voodoo spirits who can help them do serious heavy lifting in the underworld. So we get this cool shot of Jim reflected in the puddle as he enters the underworld, and then in a way which is probably fairly familiar to anybody who's done trance work, he kind of starts to go through lots of gateways. Big kind of motify kind of thing of like spirit contact is that you seem to go through a lot of gates, entrances, passages. You seem to, like, the liminal zones kind of stack up a bit like panels on a comic page. Oh dear, what am I like? The Ouija bird says, yeah, we're going to go and call on the family. So that's where Jim's off to. Over the page, we have a little break for rage cards. The world is dying. There's like a cards game, yeah? I don't really get how they work, but I know that a lot of people like them, and that's great. The world is dying. This one's called Rage, the Werewolf Apocalypse collectible trading card game. It sounds freaking brilliant, to be honest. The world is dying, smothered in the coils of the worm, but the worm is spelled in that cool with a Y way. Only the Garou werewolf. So there's loads that links to this issue here. Lycanthropy is a big thing in the Cult of the Black Serpent, although the were creature it's like arachnid lycanthropy. One turns oneself into a spider to go travelling in the spirit world, because it's best to look scary so that like other scary spirits are scared of you. Yeah, I talked about this last time, but yeah, werewolf stuff cropping up here, especially Garou, which I think that's like a French Louisiana-y, voodoo-y kind of word, isn't it? Of course it is. Only the Garou werewolves can stop it. But who will lead them? The war is on. Werewolf versus werewolf, pack versus pack, wielding razor-sharp claws and mystic weapons, calling aid from ancient spirits, the Garou vie for leadership. This advert is just the plot of the comic, or at least it's the Jim Crow plot of the comic. Back in Chicago, the real world, the cops, Peebles, and what's his buddy called? Can't remember. The cops are called Peebles. The word Peebles is fairly notey, but we'll get to that. Nordau. God damn it, Nordau. Nordau's a great name for a cop. They're talking to Mr. Dollymore. He's being a prick. He's really a prick. I really like the way that his wasted trousers are all bunched in there. He's very easy to like. He uses the N-word at Sergeant Peebles. And Nordau goes, hey, forget it, he's just one more rich asshole who could shit on us anytime he likes, which is true, but obviously Nordau doesn't have the kind of the racial component to think about. And, having the N-word thrown around by a white author in this kind of carefree way, it is a bit, I think it was kind of okay then. I can see how you might want to stop and think about it now, because really, because there are black voices who say, can you not do that, please? And it's like, it doesn't seem to be losing too much. Like artistic freedom. It's like, really, mate? Come on. Why have you got to be the guy? It's the Tarantino argument. And obviously it was Tarantino making this argument at exactly this time. Obviously Morrison isn't doing anything quite as egregious as giving himself, writing himself a character into his film who just says the N-word all the time. But it was kind of a given at the time that artists, and that tended to mean white blokes, like, let's be honest, could just do what they wanted in the name of creativity, and to a degree that's fine. They should be able to, but they should also have the ability to reflect on when that's a thing that's worth, a freedom that's worth exercising, should we say. You know, it definitely makes you empathise with Sergeant Peebles here, and it really makes you hate Mr. Dollimore, the baddie. So I think it's justified. And it is, but it's quite shocking, and it does make you go, ugh. It does raise the stakes of the issue somewhat dramatically. You know, whether you know, God, there's going to be more weird racial stuff going on later. Just let's not get too hung up on that one. That's going to, you know. Back in the spirit world, Jim is going down the bone ladder, and he kind of what's it called, the mother world. There in a sky that's constantly changing from sunset to rainy grey and dawn light, from midnight stars to thunderstorms, floats one aspect of Voudoun, the city of the sun. There's a really nice line. Where is it? A second city, in the shadow of Voudoun, a second city grows and dies without rest. Brief ulcerated towers rise up with terrible faces at the windows. Spans of bridges appear overhead, then crumble and rot. The shadow passes and the city falls. So this is probably all just like kind of Morrison's transcriptions from his own work with the Voodoo Gnostic workbook, and all of the kind of the imagery is somewhat of an interpolation for the Voodoo Gnostic workbook. Go and look it up if you want to. Love these little carrion angels. First look, they're like horrible sort of babies, like angry, hungry babies with wings. I love this. I love this like city moon as well. I think that's cool. I think Western really gets into gear here. Food for carrion angels. Yeah, so like first law of the universe, everybody hungry. Big part of like voodoo contact is like the kind of the food economy, basically. It is about nourishment and sharing of food resources. And payment in food resources, needless to say, nonetheless. Now we get onto the pride bit, really. I conjure up my magic mirror, draw it up from my gut, breathing it out like a silver river till it's streaming from every orifice. What the frick are you talking about, Jim? So all of this gloopy stuff starts to come out of Jim. It's his magic self. You need to kind of pay attention to it because it's going to be important later, really important later. This stuff is a motif in The Invisibles. Now, let's be clear. He says, breathing it out like a silver river till it's streaming from every orifice. Now, the only orifices that we see are his nose and mouth and eyes. I'm not even sure if eyes are orifices, but I guess eyelids are, you know. Tear ducts. There are orifices that we don't see, obviously, but we are told that it's coming out of them. And you would be right in thinking that this looks a lot like spunk, because that's kind of what it is. Now, you can definitely have a magic that doesn't have loads of spunk in it, but also, you know, shit, spunk, blood, sweat, tears, they are in magic. They are magical. So it's just that, like, you don't like, if you live in a sexually permissive society, and we like saying that now, don't we? Then maybe you don't need to develop quite idiosyncratic and secretive, and secretive cults where you sort of fetishize jizz. Okay, you don't need to. You can have a podcast about it, talking about jizz. It's fine. No one cares. Liquid looking glass, the door to everywhere. Le miroir fantastique. So yeah, so this substance, this stuff, is like a key kind of like bit of what the kind of the freaky fantasy sci-fi side of The Invisibles is about. And we're going to see it a lot of times. I think, thinking about it, that you may only see the magic mirror, which is what we're going to call this. It's Le Miroir Fantastique. We're going to call it Magic Mirror. All of this, again, in the Voodoo Gnostic workbook, with a little bit of a kind of a Terminator 2 liquid chrome kind of aesthetic twist from Morrison, and Western, obviously. What am I trying to say here? I think only people born with male sexual organs in The Invisibles are associated with this stuff. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking about it, and I think that maybe Yeah, I think that maybe it's like a male essence thing, and that's a little bit icky, isn't it? We don't like essential traits when it comes to gender. That's just a bit dumb. Um, but yeah, and interestingly, like it's not. It looks very similar to the pond, like the doorway of the pond here, on page 8, a couple of pages ago. But the colouring is different, and again, it is a liquid, interdimensional gateway where one goes from one sort of level or room of the spirit world into another one. I can just taste the universe running down the back of my throat. So yeah, this stuff is a bit like champagne. It's a bit like jizz. Papagere, am I getting old or am I getting younger? This is the kind of mysterious shit I like best. Jim is charming company for all of his somewhat like hyped up sort of stereotypical speech patterns. He seems nice. He's got a good sense of humour, and that goes a long way, right? So he goes in, and he's picturing him Baron Zaragoin. He goes to meet the arachnid lower, and he goes through the portal, that the magic mirror that's just come from out inside him. It forms a portal that he can go through, and we're back with the evil guys in the corporate headquarters. They've basically got like PlayStation 1s with Google glasses on them, Vives on them or whatever, early ones, and they're initiating like a kind of a newish guy into the evil corporate culture. They have basically come up with like a digital version of Desade's castle. This is what this is the way that the baddies in the Invisibles experiment with indulging their personal brand of freedom, which is obviously they're sadists. They want to take other people's freedom away from them. That's where the kind of the conflict of the Invisibles kind of lies, if you like, is that they're interested in libertinage and don't care who they have to kill to get in the way, especially if those people are black crackheads. They've got magic crack which kills the people who smoke it. I'm surprised. I don't really know how it gets distributed if it kills you as soon as you smoke it. But anyway, you smoke the crack, it kills you, but the crack in your system, they can pick up the frequency resonance. Frequency resonance is a big old conspiracy trope of like, yeah, man, if you can just find the right resonance, you can control people's minds. Like, remember the elf transmitter stuff? Bit similar to that. The elf transmitter stuff from issuesode 2 when Jack was at Speaker's Corner. But yeah, they take the crack, they die, and then the baddies use the PlayStation to beam themselves into the crack corpses. So they're like kind of like digital zombies, like we had on page 1. And then the baddies can like drive their bodies around and get up to all kinds of nasty shit, and indeed they do. So that's what's going on here. It's exploitation. It's a corporate exploitation horror, and they're all real assholes, and it's quite good fun. And obviously the other like great conspiracy trope that's being nodded to here is the CIA, the government, flooded the ghetto with drugs in the 70s and 80s to basically to create a load of money for the CIA and to kind of stop the civil rights movement in its tracks. Basically, that's a conspiracy theory. Except, as has been admitted by one of Nixon's aides since, it's totally true. Totally true. They totally did it. It's well documented and it's been admitted to. Very evil forces are in charge of the planet that you live in. What are you going to do about it, guys? Back in the spirit world, the art breaks down a little bit because there's so many words on the page, but it doesn't really matter because this kind of like this zippy Bertio derived stream of consciousness prose, it is worth reflecting how sort of crazy this is. So he's getting attacked by a psychic maggot or caterpillar. He zaps it with his bone gun. I mean, like the kind of the association of like black male virility with like penises. Oh, they're such penisy guys, black guys. That's a bit grim here too. And I think the kind of him having a laser gun is takes us a little bit too far beyond what we've seen of like what the goodies use tech-wise. But it's not that bad. Anyway, but he's getting attacked by a caterpillar. The art doesn't quite show it because there's that big caption that it's got to fit in. He zaps it with his Zozo gun. Again, all from the Voodoo Gnostic workbook. Look it up if you want. And then this bit with the UFOs, which I find really interesting. I like UFOs, that's why. But outside, so he's kind of walking around the spirit world and he looks up and he sees fleets of good UFOs and bad UFOs clashing in slow motion. Normally it's advisable not to do anything that might attract the attention of a parasitical bad UFO, but right now my belly is rumbling. I have to use my good OHAS radiation, which is just like, like your aura, basically, or like a layer of your aura, to attract a good UFO. So he just kind of he just projects at the UFO, it sees him and it comes down. And then it kind of willingly gives up this really weird panel of him like sucking on a UFO teat and draining it of its life force. And it just collapses like a kind of a plastic bag. Like brilliant art, really nicely like conceived. I think we've got good UFOs with like teats, bad UFOs with spikes. I think. So Bertio, I don't know much about a makeup art called Bertio, and I'm making up a lot of this. And and if he ever sees this, and I'm sure he won't, I hope he doesn't take any of what I've got to say in offence. He was born in 1935 in Seattle. Now, what that means is that he was 12 years old at ground zero for the birth of the 20th century UFO phenomenon. The Kenneth Arnold incident, the Maury Island incident, both of them happened within 100 miles of where he was in Washington State when he was 12. What 12-year-old wouldn't become a UFO freak after that? So obviously into this kind of highly complex and personal mythology of the cult of the Black Serpent, Voodootronics, that he's come up with, based upon his own dreams and desires and what he's experienced and learnt and seen of the world around himself. He's kind of factored UFOs into the mix, and this is one of the so it's truly like a modern sort of syncretic system, right? Going back to Blake, you either make your own system or you're enslaved to somebody else's. Bertillot, for all of its idiosyncrasies and weirdness, like it's far out, it just is. He's created his own system, and he's had to fold UFOs into it because you do. You do have to fold UFOs into it, and the bits about the UFOs in the Voodoo Gnostic workbook are really interesting. From what I can make, there are invisible UFOs filling the sky at all times, and they're kind of like aeonic nodes for where and how various forms of radiation and thinking and culture waves and vibes, basically. Yeah, UFOs are like node vibes. So you have good vibes and bad vibes. You have good UFOs and bad UFOs that kind of absorb and transmit and generate and kind of, interact and overlap with the vibes. The UFOs are vibe nodes. They're all invisible. They're everywhere, and there are good ones and bad ones, and they're in a constant war. And you can be good and have good vibes and help the good UFOs, or you could be bad and have bad vibes and help the bad UFOs. And the good UFOs are kind of, they're like beautifully sacrificial. They will take on that part of that prey part of nature willingly, and give the magician, say the Jim Crow, their sustenance willingly. They'll die so that you can live, and that's kind of angelic. That's like big news. They're good guys, right? Another point about, did I say this earlier? Maybe I said this earlier. I'm sorry, my memory's all over the place. The other point about this is that, like, although the obvious kind of spectre under all of this is like colonial history, obviously, and the kind of the damage that the damage that the state of Haiti had to emerge from after its like spectacular successful revolution. It carries a lot of damage, and Voodoo and Bertillot's version of Voodoo both have to kind of cope with that damage. They both have to root around it somehow. Now, I'm not saying that any Western, white, English, American, French guy is dealing with similar things, but right, there was a somewhat okay. So there was basically a genocide carried out against witches in Western Europe, and it is legitimate, and that chain was broken, right? Loads of people were murdered. Like, the culture was brutally suppressed in legal, cultural, social ways. It was read your Silvia Federici, man. It was crushed very successfully, and in order to rebirth that culture in the West, it makes sense for those people to, it's the only option available, really, to look to cultures that suffered similar styles of like early imperial oppression and violence, to try to build, so just to know what's going on, right? So in circumstances like Voodoo, where the Yoruban connection was damaged and had enormous violence inflicted upon it, it did nevertheless remain intact. And there are witch cultures in the West that have only got the option of looking to cultures like the Voodoo culture to build themselves from, and that does look a bit like colonialism again. It looks like cultural appropriation again, and that is problematic, but it's also kind of necessary. And you got to give the witches a break. Basically, you got to give them a pass on this a little bit. So if they end up going, yeah, I think that UFOs and scorpions are a really big part of Voodoo, and Haitian people are like, what really? There's a, I feel like the white people are being white again. There's an argument to make for like, this isn't entirely illegitimate behaviour, because a genocide was committed against witches in Western Europe, and that needs redress. And rebuilding that culture is going to take hundreds of years, and is going to require some more borrowing. Okay, he approaches the Scorpion Palace. This bit is brilliant. He goes werewolf, but it's not werewolf, it's were-spider. Like I say, you've got to. He says, how does he phrase it? It is not wise to approach the insect lower in anything less than the most horrific of forms. I assume my were-spider body, jaws snapping and clacking, web boiling in my belly. I'm not even going to talk about how the web goes into the internet thing. I'm not going to talk about how extremely online Jim Crow is right now. Look at that. But I could. But that's not what we're talking about with the web at the moment. We will talk more about web conspiracy stuff in later episodes. You bet your dollar, as if you didn't know that already. Doesn't he look great? I love that morphing and the look of him at the end. Jim Crow in his were-spider form. It's just off the chain weird. Like, it's a mark of how high Vertigo Comics set the bar that this is even imaginable. You think about Shade, the Changing Man, think about Sandman. There was far out shit happening very routinely in these very mainstream corporate comics. So much so that something like that just kind of passes. And it's a bit like it's a bit like all of the snobbery that like French comics or Japanese comics about how like Western comics don't push, and not just Western, but like Western mainstream comics don't push it enough. It's a bit like, yeah, they do. I'm afraid they do a little bit, but they definitely do. These are all the crackhead spirits. So the baddies, like Mr. Dollimore and the corporate baddies, have made a deal with the scorpion god Baron Zaragoin, who has given them the magic secrets of the zombie crack in exchange for keeping the souls of all of the people who die from the zombie crack. Again, that I mean, you know, we're pretty far down the rabbit hole here, but that is probably true too. Okay, the stuff about like the souls of the black people in the ghetto who have been destroyed by the war on drugs, they're probably, you know, they are feeding some bad spirits out there. Okay, speak of the devil. Speak of the insect lover. Now, this is Baron Zaragoin. He's a really big figure in the Voodoo Gnostic workbook, almost like the kind of the master form of Bertio's temple, but like totally made up, like, or not made up, but like unique to the cult of the Black Serpent, and not like a normal voodoo lover at all. Just in the Invisibles and Michel Bertio's work. Which isn't to say, of course, he's not a real spirit. It is perhaps to say that there isn't a huge amount of value in contacting him, right? Again, it feels a bit like a white guy move. It feels a bit like you might be like, oh, I'm going to try and do the most. I'm going to go and meet a scorpion god. That sounds cool, right? Whereas if you've got a community of people, you're like, don't. It's just like a demon. In fact, there are similarities in the arachnid thing between Zaragoin and Asmodeus, our boy from the Arcadia storyline, the guy playing chess. I think they might be, you know, I'm not saying they're the same guy. That would be an error, but there are similarities in the roles that they might play in their respective traditions. Roles like kind of maths and abstract processing, basically, the like chess webs, being able to calculate the angles between different apparently unrelated events and pull them together. So Zaragoin and his vibe do exist elsewhere in the Invisibles thing. But yeah, like there's like an interview with Grant Morrison from like 2017 where he's mainly talking about the works of Robert Anton Wilson, but also some of his own magical experiences, where he talks about his contact with Baron Zaragoin in some depth. And it's a bit like, so kind of initially it was quite traumatic, and then if you look at it over the course of over the course of 20 years and reflect on what I did, it's like, oh yeah, that was pretty negative all round, actually. And it's a bit like the reason that Zaragoin isn't in Haitian voodoo is because, like, stay away from it's a bit like in the same way that like scorpions don't make great household pets, you know. Sorry if you've got a scorpion for a pet, I'm sure he's lovely, but you wouldn't let him run around the house, would you? So basically they have a little chat. Zaragoin recognises Jim Crow as Baron Gede and as Jim Crow. He's a bit like, you're being ridden. This is the that's much more standard Maya Deren derived voodoo info. And then, this is quite interesting. This is plotty. He goes, I know you. You're Jim Crow, the Invisible. Have a word with this guy here. That's King Mob. He kind of makes a kind of a slime King Mob with his claws. We gave him gifts, and we want payment for them. And Jim Crow goes, if I see him, I'll tell him. But it's like, so right, so King Mob's been messing with Zaragoin as well. As I say, it's an interesting parallel here. Like, you know how during this kind of spirit voyage thing, Jim Crow has kept his own spirit safe on the telly in a way which perhaps mirrors that. I think Grant Morrison tried to outsource some of his bad karma to a media representation of himself. Yeah? And I don't know, I guess you'd have to ask him how successful he thought it was. But that's kind of a bit of a thing, is that kind of about this point in the comic, you start to notice that certain biographical details of Morrison's do start to influence the text. So maybe going forward we'll have to talk a bit more about Grant Morrison as an individual and what's going on with him in the 90s, but I'm going to try and avoid that. It seems a little bit prurient, to be honest. Not really any of my business. I just like the comics. Jim Crow's got what looks a bit like a paper straw, you know, very, very go ahead, very future forward on that. And he's sucking. He pops he says, "Look, man, I'm taking these spirits back. I'll give you some other spirits in return." And Zaragorn's like, "All right, okay, so that's okay. I'm very monstrous, though." And he uses the straw to pierce these weird little egg sacs that Zaragorn has been keeping the dead crackhead souls in. The expressions on their face are great. When the scorpion appears, then he's like, "Shit." Uses his paper straw to suck their souls out of their eggs. And now he's gonna... Oh, okay, well, we don't know what he's gonna do. Meanwhile, the crack zombies wake up, having just died of their overdose, and now they're being driven by the baddies. They go and pay a visit to La Merci, our voodoo priestess from earlier, whose grandchildren they killed before. She's making a meal. Remember, Jim Crow said he wanted a big, hearty meal in return for his services. And just as the baddies are about to use these zombie bodies to kill La Merci, Jim Crow turns up. He's got his Zozo gun all juiced up and firing again. Zap, 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 zap. And he roasts the zombie forms of the intruders, which is good. He arrives just in the nick of time. Bring out your dead. And yeah, it's a bit like, is it a taser? Is it a laser gun? As a spirit weapon, I get what the Zozo gun is. When he brings it into the real world, I'm a bit like, is he just shooting magic lasers at them? Which is kind of a bit of a step away from the sci-fi spy stuff before that the Invisibles has been trading in before. But I don't mind. Don't get caught up on it. Oh my goodness. Okay, over on the page, White Wolf Publishing. Them again. They've been spending a lot of money on Vertigo lately. They've got another bunch of books out. Blood War, Tombs, House of Secrets, Tower of Babel. We get a lot of White Wolf Publishing adverts. They're kind of like goth fiction stuff based upon, games like the gaming cards that we talked about. Some call us provocative. Others say we have little respect for tradition. Some call us brash. They definitely belong in the Invisibles. Let's be honest, they definitely do. I think that the House of Secrets looks like it's got quite a cool cover. Nice little bit of kind of goth Beardsley stuff. But come on, the books are called Blood War, Tombs, Moorcock, Gaiman, Nancy Collins, Joe Lansdale, Storm Constantine, John Constantine's mum. House of Secrets, Tower of Babel. These are very Invisibles-y words, guys. Tower of Babel one's cool too. Look, the tower struck on the cover. I'm warming to White Wolf Publishing. If anybody's ever read one of their books, let me know. Tell me how it was. Back in this world, Jim, there's all these charred zombie corpses. Sorry about the window. That's all right. How he sucked up in the spirit world, he sucked up the souls. Now he's breathing them out in a little, like a little bubble thing. And then these cute little baby souls in the bubbles, and he's setting them free. Meanwhile, evil scorpions, like the one in the crystalline structure of the crack is in the shape of scorpions. When the body of the zombies are killed, the scorpions kind of come out, and then they fire the souls or the consciousnesses of the baddies out of their tails that fly away. These are cool details, man. Like, this is cool. This is cool sci-fi, fantasy, horror shit. It just is. And the Ouija bird follows the spirits, the evil spirits, back to where they came from. And he's probably a bit tired from having used his Zozo gun. But the big feast that La Merci has been preparing for him, Jim gets to tuck into that now. I enjoy cake. Back at Unitol HQ, they're all dead. Dollimore and the new guy and another guy are alive. But basically most of the guys who were riding the zombies. So that's interesting. So it's riding technology on different levels. Yeah. Jim gets ridden by Papa Gede. These guys are using Zaraguan's technology to ride crack zombies. Sorry for saying crack zombies. It sounds a bit of a nasty thing to say about people suffering from addiction problems, but you know. Because their bodies, because they've been killed, or because their souls haven't made it back yet, or whatever, loads of the guys are dead. They're freaking out. Oh, this is bad. One of them pukes up. You know, it's a bad day, bad night in the office, and it's nice to see the baddies get a bit of comeuppance. And then Jim Crow arrives. Who's there? Don't you know? I'm Papa Gede. I'm Baron Samedi, Baron Picot, I'm Baron Cimetière, which are all sort of, they're not the same character, but the Gede family, or the Gede Loa, has these different aspects of it. Baron Samedi, you know him from the Roger Moore movie, yeah, you know. Cracking soundtrack, thanks Paul. I am death and your ass is mine. No! And the look of fear on Dollimore's face is again brilliant. Jim Crow's come to clean house. Oh, another one of these boring adverts over the page for, you know, having a live chat with DC Comics creators. Alan Grant, Dennis O'Neill, and Doug Munch, the big book writer of the Big Book of Conspiracies, which is great. And Batman, who's great. Yeah, it's like, I was like, yeah. So it's Alan Grant, Denny O'Neill, Doug Munch. That's cool. There's no way around that. You can log on to America Online. Where will Comics by the Stars be this June? Chat to them about Lobo, about Batman, about conspiracies. You could do that now on Twitter, but you could do it back in '95 as well. It's pretty cool. It's cool. The graphics on the advert are terrible. No, it's very dumb. Not dumb, dull. Sorry, just dull, boring. Now, so La Merci has obviously called the cops. So Peebles. Hang on, why did I think Peebles was an interesting name? Yeah, I remember. I'm such a nerd. The guy, they turn up and they kick the door down, Sergeant Peebles reveals where Jim is kind of like taking vengeance upon the baddies. And then we have probably, you know, we've had some pretty weird panels in this issue so far, haven't we? We've had collapsing, we've had like UFOs being like suckled to the point of collapse. We've had big spider demons. We've had were spiders. We've had magic jizz coming out of every orifice and turning into a transdimensional gateway. We've had, you know, lot of crazy stuff. And then this is maybe this minstrel scene here. So basically, and it's cool this because it's a little bit of a Brechtian moment. Morrison sort of breaks the logic of the comic because it's a bit like, so what's happening is all of the dead baddies who have been riding the crack zombies with their PlayStations and their virtual reality glasses have kind of somehow, through Jim's just kind of magic, been turned into these horrible zombie minstrel figures. And they're eating the body of Dollimore while he's still alive, like in, you know, Day of the Dead or something. And it is very much like Day of the Dead, in fact, because of all this zombie stuff. Sergeant Peebles kind of sees all this happening, but it's not really clear what he's seeing. It is obviously like an illusion of some sort, but he's seeing it very clearly. And Dollimore is screaming, kill me, help, But he's a racist piece of shit, and Peebles is totally shocked by what he's saying and isn't going to help him and just sort of closes the door. And Nordau's just like, yeah, fine, I didn't hear the screaming. I can't smell the blood or anything. So like, you know, it's not quite clear what's really happening here, what the actual scene behind the door is, but the experience of it, as it is translated by Peebles' brain, is this. So Jim Crow is obviously a minstrel song, Jim Crow is a minstrel character. Oh, that's right, yeah. He says straight out of Camptown because of the song, the minstrel song Camptown Races. Camptown Races, sing the song, doo-da, doo-da. Camptown could mean either there's a town called Camptown in like Pennsylvania, again, not far from Philadelphia, where we know that there's an operating cult of the Black Serpent and the Roots, who maybe Camptown, the other kind of possible etymological source of the word Camptown is whatever the, like when you would have itinerant worker towns in camps, like setting up railroads or whatever, they would be called Camptown. So Camptown is kind of a generic word for places where black people in the 19th century in America would be found. But the other Camptown, the one in Pennsylvania, is named after Camptown in Scotland, which is a town on the Scottish borders about 40 miles away from Peebles, a town called Peebles, which is Sergeant Peebles' surname. Now, it does seem like a reach, honestly, but with Morrison's whole Scottish vibe, maybe that's the joke. I don't know. Small towns in the borders region, of Scotland, just very far south of Scotland, the deep south of Scotland. Minstrels, they're really creepy and not funny, and one of those things that Morrison. Okay, so I'm not trying to justify it. Like, I'm not saying that minstrel culture was good. Like, obviously, it was creepy. If you are but Morrison's philosophy, right, at this point is, and today, I think, according to his recent interviews again, is a lot of what we take of as being kind of cultural problems and magical supernatural effects. If you add in time as a dimension, like the aliens who abducted him did, we'll get to that we'll get to this in later episodes. But basically, if you kind of factor time back in, these cultural problems and supernatural effects dissolve, they disappear, right? Now, how this kind of fits into this moment of the zombie minstrels singing and dancing and eating is that if you take a kind of a long view of history, you could think, I don't agree with this, but you could think that the minstrels, because they were literally the first time you could see a black face on the stage, they ultimately were a doorway to greater black visibility and representation, and were therefore a good thing. I think that's a stretch. I think that whole taking a four-dimensional view of history thing that Morrison likes, I think it, and I've probably said this before, it doesn't have a good fix for the problem of human suffering at all. It just kind of says, oh man, who's going to care in 100 years' time? And it's a bit like, I don't care who's going to care in 100 years' time. I care that I care now. And it doesn't have a good answer for that. So if you are praying to a voodoo god and you're like, you've got to free my people, you've got to free my people, you've got to free my people, maybe they would think, it's cool, we're going to help black people be, be performers, we just, integrate, share their culture, integrate into American society by putting black faces on white people. And then those are going to turn into, and then eventually minstrels, there were black minstrels and they became very popular. Lots of black people did go to minstrel shows. Eventually there were black minstrels. And, the heyday of minstrelsy was like 1830s to 1870s or something. While America was going through, on the other hand, like very violent stuff was happening in the name of, not black liberation, but the end of the slave trade, or the end of slavery rather in America, although, everyone knows that the American Civil War was a bit more complex than that. Certainly wasn't a black and white issue in the way that, like, certain histories try to frame it. But it's interesting that, like, minstrelsy is like white people being ridden by black faces, by blackface, which then slowly became black faces, like actual black people on stage. Maybe if you were a voodoo god and you had 4-dimensional perspective and you weren't troubled by, time moving at human pace, you would think that was a good fix for helping. Maybe that would be one of the mechanisms that you'd use. Maybe if you were thinking about how you would create a shift in human consciousness, you might fuse 2 stars together several trillion miles away and use that to give off cosmic rays that would change the ways that people's brains and DNA worked in a far distant star system on a far distant planet 160,000 years later. Maybe. It's cool to think about, isn't it? It's well trippy, man. So again, we've got this riding thing happening again. We've got zombies happening again. Maybe Jim is just doing this. Maybe he's had time to just like string up the kind of the minstrel tent. We get the word stump speech from minstrelsy, like a guy sitting on a stump and making a speech. It's like Speaker's Corner. Maybe he's like got the zombies to put makeup on each other and dress each other up in like natty waistcoats. This whole scene is shocking. Again, is it Morrison's place to kind of use the minstrel as a figure like that and to make these provocations about what it might mean? Obviously, I'm making those provocations. I can't blame it on Morrison. I'm being an asshole here too. I'm sorry. I'm being problematic. It's interesting to think about, but it's shocking. It's an artistic freedom thing, I guess. I don't know. I would have thought that a little bit of circumspection might make one go, I'm going to find a different denouement. But again, it's an exploitation comic. It's meant to be grim. It's meant to be over the top. It's meant to be nasty. And it is. I don't know. I'm privileged enough to just see how this is okay. And people without my privilege might be like, this is fucking outrageous. How dare you? and I'm sorry. But it is quite nasty, and that's kind of cool. The look of Dollamore's reaction to it. Detective Peebles' reaction to it, with his kind of nice surprised face, he's like, "Holy shit!" And then he kind of goes, "Yep, I'm going to let that happen because that's cool." So the baddies get a proper comeuppance. We can always come back later. Don't just stand there. Let's go eat. And these kind of 2 white guys are left looking like chumps while Peebles, who may be named after a small town in Scotland where my cousins live. He walks off feeling smug, not smug. He's a bit shocked because it's a shocking scene. But at least he knows something that the white guys don't, and the baddies have definitely they're eating each other, and that's great. While Jim laughs, he finally saw death, and death was an N-word. Yeah, troubling stuff. But that's the end of the issue, and it's like it is a big departure from like the radical spy-fi stuff that we've seen. All of this crazy dreamscape artwork from Chris Weston, all that stuff, and then a big sort of like ta-da, ha, blood and guts at the end. And that's one of the first, and obviously that's like the first done in one issue that the Invisibles has done since we've been on this journey. And whatever it is, it's not boring. Can you hear the cat? I'm sorry, but the cat's being a pain. Podcasting, isn't it? Onto the letters page. So we've already said we've already had the little reading list. Oh god, then there's this letter here from Skye Woodruff in Oxnard. Oxnard is a ancient Oxnard, Los Angeles. No, sorry, Oxnard, Louisiana. So again, there's a little bit of a voodoo connection there. While I'm being useless with geography, Oxnard is a French word meaning ox is nuts. Oxnard. Dear Grant, I was very seriously surprised to see you mention Wilhelm Reich in one of your responses in the letter column of issue number 6. It really is quite issuesode 6. It really is quite rare to encounter someone who knows about his work, his theories, and his treatment by the American government. It is even rarer to encounter someone who has undergone orgone therapy or even something based on it. How did you like it? I've been aware of Reich's work most of my life. His brother-in-law was Robert Ollendorff, a psychologist in England who founded the Summerhill School. My parents became friends with Robert when they lived in England, and he became my godfather when I was born. They also became great believers in Robert and Willie's work, Willie being Wilhelm Reich, including their theories on child rearing. Thus, I am not only a devotee of the two psychologists' ideas, I am somewhat a product of it, and I'm very happy with my relationships with my parents and the decisions they made while raising me. Okay. Obviously, this is August 2019. I'm recording a podcast. I have to mention Epstein here. You just have to. It's a conspiracy podcast. I don't know. Ever since the fucking Jimmy Savile thing, like shit like this really sets off my pedo radar. I'm sorry if this imputes Sky Woodruff and his parents in any way. But Summerhill School in England is kind of famous for being the most inspected by the government school of all time. Now, and it's got like a radical kind of approach to letting the children pick the curriculum and stuff, letting them experiment and explore themselves. So, but like I say, ever since the Savile thing, it just sets my pedo radar off really badly, man. I'm sorry. I don't think Summerhill School is being investigated by the government so often because they're worried about the curriculum not being followed. Do you know what I mean? I think there might be other reasons. Like Wilhelm Reich's work is really interesting, but he had pretty weird views about. He had some views which I think don't account for the. Maybe I'm just uptight. I don't think I am. I think you're supposed to let children kind of grow old enough to make their own sexual decisions before they're allowed to have any kind of sexual contact with anybody older, certainly. And kind of with each other as well. It's not to be encouraged. If it happens, you've got to go, oh, don't do that. Wait till you're older. Because it makes sense that you have a certain level of emotional and physical development before you can handle the kind of the actual emotional complexity. See, Reich was really aware of this feedback loop between emotions and like the biology of sex, but he didn't quite think that might mean that you let them both fully develop before you use them, because if the sexual function develops and the emotional function is kind of not kind of correctly calibrated with it, and one of them then kind of goes off and fires, then it's going to send odd signals, potentially very damaging signals, back to the emotional centre, right? That seems pretty straightforward, even within Reich's own scheme. And then this chap says in this letter, I'm very happy with my relationships with my parents and the decisions they made while raising me. No one asked. That's nice that you volunteered. It's a little bit of that raises a flag that you thought fit to mention it. That you thought necessary to mention it. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I don't think it was Ollendorff himself, but the head of Summerhill School, he used to have private sessions. He used to have regular private one-on-one sessions with certain children, and then he stopped. I'm sorry, I sound like a fucking Mary Whitehouse or something. My Reichian therapy, the Morrison's response is, my Reichian therapy is still ongoing and I'm finding it fascinating and productive. Reich's ideas seem to me to be eminently sane and thoroughly practical, and I believe that 21st century medicine will accord him the respect and renown he deserves. I reckon that for adult psychiatry, that might be bang on. For child rearing, there may be complications there that I'm not down with. Anyway. Whew. But yeah. Nasty shit, guys. Maybe. I'm sorry if not. If you're just hippies letting kids have a good time and letting them find their own way in life, then that's fine. But something about doing it in a Cody Shell, Rapid City SD. Where's SD? Not San Diego. Is it South Dakota? Rapid City, South Dakota. Wow, cool place, man. The gender balance. The first thing that struck me was what I call the gender balance of the team. 2 girls, 3 boys. Wait, there's boy, capital B, and Lord Fanny, still. Boy's garb is acceptably, in swish quotes, female by society standards. In contrast to boys' attire, Lord Fanny's garb would not be generally acceptable to society. Lord Fanny is the in-between point on the Invisible's gender spectrum. There are 2 obvious parallels between Lord Fanny and earlier Morrison characters, Danny the Street and Rebus. Rebus was a hermaphrodite. Lord Fanny presumably is male, transvestite. I think we'll get to that. Society's attitudes towards both types can be seen in each character. We're going to skip over some of this. Morrison doesn't really respond. Yeah, basically it looks like he's misgendering Lord Fanny a bit. I'm not down with that. But it was a different time. And he's from South Dakota. I don't think it's terribly woke there, is it? Certainly not 25 years ago. Next one, final letter, is from Sven Votten Undersmöl. Brilliant name. From Kent, Ohio. Willoughby Kipling. Marquis de Sade. Castle Silling. He basically goes, this is far out. Yeah, it mentions Genesis Peerage. Sensible. Diddly boom. Yeah, just a kind of a fan letter. I think it's wild, man. And he's right, it is. Next issue. Remember those vicious, homeless hunting hombres from issue number 2? Yes, I do. Well, they're back. In the second of our one-off stories, we discover why Diana split from Charles, meet the thing that haunts Glam's castle, and find out what happens when you mate with ultra-terrestrials. One Man's Nightmare becomes 23 pages of fun in Royal Monsters next month. I'm really looking forward to the next issue, and that's a brilliant write-up of it. Over on the subscribe page, we've got Morpheus, El Dream Squeezer. I think that's a Mark Hempel picture. Looks great. He's our little final spirit for this issue. We've already covered the rather good editorial by Chaz Chuog on the Vertigo On the Ledge page. Not much coming out. That's the big release of Vertigo for this month. Everything else, there's nothing new. Goddess, lots of Sandman, lots of Shade. Tank Girl, Preacher, Jonah Hex. Next month, Egypt by Pete Milligan and Glenn Dillon. That's pretty good. The mystery play trade paperback. When an actor playing God is brutally murdered, a small English town is torn apart. This tense psychological thriller descends into a hallucinatory world of guilt and sacrifice, and of judgment and retribution, by Grant Morrison and John J. Muth. So yeah, the mystery play was like another thing that Morrison was working on, an original graphic novel, yeah, I quite like that. I think I quite like it. I haven't read it for ages, but I think I quite like it. Sandman Mystery Theatre retail poster. Matt Wagner's evocative cover painting from the Sandman Mystery Theatre trade paperback can now cover your wall. That sounds cool. I'd like that. If anyone's got one of those, I'll have it. Speaking of which, cool advert for Sandman Mystery Theatre on the inside back cover. It's good. I'm sure this isn't intentional, but they use these black and white interior cover pages for Sandman Mystery Theatre adverts a lot, and it works, right? Works for the noirish feel. I'm not sure how this relates to this issue or to the last one, except he's got a little pocket watch like Jim Crow had. There's a kind of an old schooly vibe, which maybe relates to the stuff we're going to come across next issue. Can't wait for next issue. It's going to be great. On the back cover, Skid is an advert for Skid Row, Subhuman Race, the new album. I will say that there's these like Warholian like repeated images here. It's quite difficult to see, but if you look closely, it's a picture of I think it's Goya, right? Saturn eating his children. Very famous picture, but very small, very small on the cover of this Skid Row album, or on this advert for the Skid Row album. I presume it's not too different to the cover. Is it Saturn eating his children, or is it like? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, mad, crazy eyes, eating a baby. Not irrelevant to the Invisibles. Saturn. I'm pretty sure we've covered him before. And I think we'll cover him again. Origin of a New Species, Skid Row, Subhuman Race, the new album, featuring My Enemy, Breaking Down, and Beat Yourself Blind. I think I know what Beat Yourself Blind is about. It's not big, it's not clever, guys. Where is it? Damn it, I wanted to turn to it quicker. I think I know what Beat Yourself Blind is about. Huh? I refer you to page 10 of the issue at hand. Produced by Bob Rock, that's my new name. I'm not called Bobsy anymore. I'm called Bob Rock. Bob Rock. Bob Rock. Now I'm a record producer. I produce Skid Row albums. And management, McGehee, not McGee, but McGehee, like the like Mc, the Indian cooking butter. The McGee Entertainment. Who puts your management company on an advert for your album? Maybe if you're really starting out, but Skid Row are a pretty well-established band by this point, right? I think that is what they call lame. Skid Row, Subhuman Race, the new album. I have not listened to Subhuman Race by Skid Row, and I'm not going to. If you are a new Patreon subscriber and you subscribe for $5, 5 big ones, and you message me via Patreon and say, suck it up, this isn't going to happen. Suck it up, listen to the Skid Row album, then I will. If you're an existing subscriber, doesn't count. I'm not going to do it. Don't go getting any ideas. But if you want to give me, but I will listen to a Skid Row record and tell you what I thought of it in return for $5. I'm not doing it for any other reason apart from that. My favourite song is, as we've established, Beat Yourself Blind. That's it. Join us next time. We're doing Folk Horror, issuesode 11. That was issuesode 10 of the Invisible Podcast, Season of Ghouls. Thanks for watching. Follow me on Twitter at bobsy-. Subscribe, patreon.com/Diane Podcast. Support with good vibes. Forgive me for rushing this last bit. It's getting late. Forgive me for any of the racy missteps that I may have made while talking about this somewhat problematic issue. And cheers for watching. Really appreciate your time and effort, guys. See you soon. Bye.